Hi. Korg's Multipoly is its fifth in this form factor. It's inspired by their original analog monopoly, but definitely not a reissue. It's a fully digital synth with 4 oscillators per voice, wavetable capabilities, 4 timbres, dual filters, multiple flavors of East Coast and West Coast synths and Waveshapers, with multiple filter models, Korg's Motion Sequencing 2.0, chaos physics, and plenty of effects. In this video, I'll take a look at where it sits within Korg's synth lineup with a focus on what's new and different compared to Modwave, and how Multipoly compares to the competition. I'll also play you dozens of its presets so you'll get an idea for how it sounds. Before I start, a quick disclosure: Korg sent me Multipoly. Other than that, no money changed hands, they have no say over the content of this video, and don't get to see it before it's published. Okay, first, if you'd like a comparison to Korg's original monopoly from 1982, this video isn't the place to get it. Not only because I don't have one, but also because Multipoly is so far ahead in so many ways. It's like comparing an old rotary phone to a modern cell phone. It's just a totally different synth and experience. However, a more relevant comparison, I think, is to Modwave and, to a certain degree, but less so, Wavestate, both from Korg. All three share very similar effects and a comprehensive modulation matrix, and all three have Korg's interesting generative style motion sequencing. Korg also makes Op6 and King Korg Neo in this form factor, but those are different beasts altogether. I've reviewed them separately. As far as Wavestate goes, its generative sequencer is unique in that it can play a different sample per sequence slot, making it very distinctive sounding compared to Modwave and Multipoly or any other synth, so that alone sets Wavestate apart. But when comparing to Modwave, there's a fairly large overlap, though both are distinctive. Korg labels Multipoly as an analog modeling synth, which it is, with multiple analog modeling and wave shaping capabilities, but each of Multipoly's oscillators can also be used as a full-fledged wavetable synth. Multipoly also comes bundled with the exact same dozens of wavetables as Modwave, and like Modwave, you can also import your own. Now, Modwave has some distinct advantages too, namely the fact that you can also play samples and multi-samples on it, and it comes with a 2 GB database with a variety of samples and multi-samples of different instruments. Modwave also has a dual wavetable mode where you can blend between 2 wavetables and it maintains both in phase. However, Multipoly has 4 oscillators compared to only 2 on Modwave, and you can load up wavetables into all 4 of its oscillators if you really wanted. And you could then program a macro to blend between 2 or 3 or 4 wavetables any way you like. So for example, in this patch, I've set up 2 simple wavetables on oscillator 1 and 2, and this macro to blend between the 2. But as you can see, they're not quite phase aligned. Modwave also has another advantage compared to Multipoly. While it only has 2 oscillators, their controls are more hands-on as opposed to the shared controls on Multipoly. Beside that, Multipoly has quite a few additional modules that Modwave doesn't. A new oscillator type called Waveshaper. It's a wave folder, but not just, it actually has quite a few other wave shaping options, which are interesting variations on the theme, each with their own character. Its noise generator and ring mod come on top of the 4 oscillators, so that's 6 sources into the mixer, and it also has dual filters, which can be routed in series or in parallel. Each of those filters, by the way, can be in any one of the types, which we'll listen to later. Multipoly also has a few new filter models, including an SEM model, a monopoly model, MS-20 models. These and others are also available on the Modwave. However, Korg says they've been rewritten, and you can also run them at a higher sample rate. Additional oscillators and oversampling may be at the expense of polyphony though. Another important difference, Multipoly has 4 layers or timbres like WaveState as opposed to 2 on Modwave. This lets you create more complex patches or use an external sequencer to sequence different layers. So for example, this is a 3-layer patch. This is 1 layer. This is the second. And this is the third. And you could add a 4th if you like. You could also split these across the keyboard. One thing though, the arpeggiator is global for all 4 layers, as opposed to Modwave where you can run one arpeggiator on one layer and a second on the other. Now, while it's not the same thing, here each patch can get its own motion sequencer. So for example, this is layer A, or just layer A without C. And then this is layer B. And of course together, so there are ways around the arpeggiator limit. Now, an important reason why the arpeggiator is global to all 4 layers is the homage to Monopoly's layer rotation feature. So both the original Monopoly and, of course, Multipoly can rotate layers for each subsequent note that you play. That means you'll get a different timbre for every note press, which can be an interesting effect as it cycles through layers, and of course, with the arpeggiator on, can get pretty interesting. There actually aren't that many presets in here that use that effect. And there are a few layer rotate options, different orders. So this, for example, is a random order. So certainly an interesting effect, but you can mimic it and get pretty close with a motion sequencer if you want something similar on Modwave or Wavestate. Let's try one more. And maybe one more. And then there are a few other differences compared to Modwave scattered throughout the signal flow. Multipoly has an audio rate filter mod option, we'll test that later, a post filter drive, and a chord mode. You can record up to 8 notes and play them with one key. And then another difference I saw, there's a drift page, kind of like vintage mode on other synths that lets you loosen up various synth parameters. So beside all those things, Modwave and Multipoly have a lot in common. They've got a similar mod matrix, the same chaos physics controls. Both have 4 macro knobs and 4 envelopes, though the envelopes have been improved a bit on Multipoly. 5 LFOs, both have interesting mod processors, though Multipoly has 8 instead of just 2 on Modwave. And both have the same 8-lane motion sequencer per layer with up to 64 steps per sequence lane. Both also have the same maximum polyphony, up to 60 voices. Both have the same small black and white OLED screen, as well as companion software editor/librarian, which works as a large screen when connected to a computer over USB. So it stays perfectly in sync as you swap presets and look at different elements of those presets. Any change of a parameter on the device is reflected immediately on the software. And if you make changes in the software, they'll be reflected immediately in the sound Now, while the hands-on experience is why we buy hardware synths, connecting the app has a few advantages. First, it's a great learning tool to get a bird's eye view of the different modules in the synth. It also gives you a great view into what's going on in the motion sequencer, something that's very hard to do on a small screen like this. And you can also see all 64 steps of a sequence in the software as opposed to only 16 on screen here. Overall, the controls here are faster than using the software in most cases, but I did find myself using the software for saving presets or performances because renaming presets on this small screen is a pain, and if you do that on a computer, then sync is immediate. In terms of build, the bottom side of the enclosure is plastic, this is metal, and these are real wood. They don't run all the way around the sides though, just on top. The knobs are pots, not encoders, which is not typically what you'd want on a synth where what they control changes all the time, but the scaling mode works really nicely. So I have to say the fact that these are pots and not encoders didn't trouble me much. The keybed itself feels okay. It's velocity sensitive without aftertouch. Key feel is relatively light, but works well, I think. In terms of overall workflow, Multipoly is identical to Modwave and Wavestate. When you turn a knob, you'll be routed to the page and that parameter on that page. And if that module has additional pages, you'll see that on top here, and you can page between the pages using Shift and the arrows, or move between parameters using the arrows. Shift lets you access all the parameters that are labeled in blue under the buttons and knobs. Enter also acts as kind of a shift for some parameters. For example, for viewing a parameter's value without changing it, you just hold Enter and turn a knob and its value won't change. And it has a bit of additional functionality like soloing layers. And if you're editing parameters with the encoder, you can move through parameters quickly by holding Enter. As you've seen me do here, while you can do things with Shift, you can double tap buttons for the same effect, and you can also double tap Shift to hold it. Finally, for the overview, Multipoly supports excellent seamless sound transitions. You can hold a patch and move to a different one, and even move to other patches, and these notes will still play. So seamless transitions work great. And presets for this synth aren't just for the entire state of the machine, which is called a performance. It also supports presets for other elements within a performance. So for example, layers can have their own presets. So you can swap out just a single layer. There are also presets for effects and even presets for motion sequences. So this is a great way to explore variations on a sound just by loading up different motion sequencing presets onto it. In terms of connectivity, Multipoly has 1/4-inch headphone and balanced stereo outputs, which is important because if you're working connected to a computer over USB, using balanced cables and a balanced interface will help you avoid noise. Then there's a foot switch jack, USB, like I mentioned, for interfacing with the software. This also sends regular MIDI, but not audio. And then you've got 5-pin MIDI in and out. Okay, let's dive in and take a deeper look and start with an init program. I'll start with the oscillators. All 4 are identical except for the cross-mod sync and ring mod options. And each of the 4 oscillators can work in one of 3 modes: classic, digital, which means Wavetable, and Waveshaper. Oscillator character can be modified by these 2 knobs, which also have a shift mode. And you can also pan the oscillators separately and also send them to the different filters separately. Let's go over the classic or virtual analog style shapes first. Sometimes these knobs don't do anything, by the way. For example, for the sawtooth waveform, for pulse, we've got pulse width control, as you may have guessed. And luckily, there's a pulse width LFO easily accessible. Let's turn it down for now. Anyway, I won't go through all these shapes. Many of them have their own type of shaping or morphing. And for some, this parameter works as well. For example, here you can see we're controlling the volume of a second saw. Sometimes this doesn't do anything. Same goes for morph. Anyway, so that's it for classic. Let's move on to digital or wavetable. Like I mentioned, this is a full wavetable oscillator. You can see it morph here between simple shapes, because this wavetable is called basics, but we can quickly move ahead to other shapes, which are more complex. And these are the same, like I mentioned, as Modwave. And like I mentioned earlier, you can load up your own waveforms into here.
Hello, Lupop.
By the way, I owe the Australian accent to Vital.
Hello, Lupop.
To make my life easier, let's apply an envelope to this so I don't have to move this knob manually. Making these mod matrix assignments is pretty easy. You hold mod and page plus, and you'll get on-screen instructions on what to do. Basically, move the destination, touch the source, let's say filter B envelope, press enter, and then increase the intensity. And if we go into the filter B envelope and introduce some attack, we've got this automated. Anyway, back to what this can do as a wavetable synth. You've got a few modifiers. These are just fixed offline modifications to the wavetable. So this is the raw wavetable, and let's quickly go through a few of these. They emphasize various harmonics, apply various clipping, lo-fi, and distortion effects to the wavetable. Anyway, those are the one-time modifiers, and then we also have the morph control. And for this to work, we need to choose a morph type, and there are quite a few of those. So let's take a listen to those. And morph control adjusts their effect. Let's try a few more. While we're spending time on these, I'll just say that Modwave has a couple of these morph modes that Multipoly doesn't. These are a bit terrifying, I'll admit. And like pulse width, you've got a direct connection to the morph LFO if you want. So that's pretty much it for the wavetable or digital oscillator. Let's move on to the Waveshaper. This starts you off with either a sine wave or a triangle waveform and applies a form of wave shaping to it. The default is Berkeley, which is a West Coast style wave folder, but then there are plenty of other wave folders and shapers and manglers to explore. And there are literally dozens of these, so I won't go through all of them. But I think each of these is kind of like its own journey that I don't know about you, I enjoy taking, especially with reverb. Anyway, control 1 is gain into the Waveshaper, and PW morph controls the pulse width of the input oscillator. And then control 2 with shift introduces a DC offset for asymmetric shaping. Okay, let's move on and take a listen to the noise generator. It's got a cutoff control that works nicely with speckle, which is a form of distortion, as you can see. So if you want clean noise, just turn speckle down. And then source is an interesting one. It controls whether additional voices increase noise levels. So in voice mode, they won't. But in patch mode, the more notes you play, the louder the noise. Moving on, ring mod can add aggressive and metallic character to your sound. For this to work, the oscillators it uses need to be on, and their relative frequency matters, of course. And you can also add some noise into the ring mod for extra grit. So that's ring mod. You've also got oscillator sync, and there are two modes for this. If you're using a synth like this, I'm going to assume you know how sync works. So that's sync, and then there's Xmod, where it too has two modes, either single or dual. And then depending on what you have going on with your oscillators, things can get quite interesting. So that's the oscillator section, sync, ring mod, noise, and on the way to the filters, we've got a mixer. This lets you control level, panning, polarity, and AB, meaning which filter you want to send each of the sources to. And there are 2 pages of this. If a source is in parentheses, it means that it's off. Note, by the way, that stereo oscillators will cost you in polyphony. So all that gets sent on to the filters. Let's take a listen to the filters, and for that I'll go to an init patch. Multipoly has 2 filters. You can turn them on or off, and they can be routed in series by default or in parallel. Besides the usual suspect, cutoff and resonance, you can trim audio coming in and going out of the filter. This is the monopoly emulator filter type, which is supposed to be, according to Korg, similar to the Poly 6 filter. Then you've got MS-20 filters. These have the characteristic grit you'd expect. Both low pass and high pass. Then Mini is a 4-pole low pass filter with, of course, resonance that reduces bass. Then there's an SE space M/P, which is, I guess, Korg's way of not saying SEM filter. I think it sounds pretty nice. Here, resonance appropriately doesn't reduce bass. And it has a crossfade parameter which morphs it into a high pass through a notch. And then it also has a bandpass mode. Here, crossfade, by the way, doesn't do anything. So it's just an SEM bandpass mode. And then the more reveals more models. Pro LP and a bunch of others, ladder HP, and so on. I won't go through all of these. Multi-filter is an interesting one. This lets you crossfade between 2 filter types, which you set on the next page. So I could say crossfade between a low pass and band pass. So let's try that. Go back to crossfade. So that'll do that. And there are a bunch of types in here. So beside filter types, there's a bit more to explore. On panel, you've got key tracking, mode crossfade, and audio rate mod. Let's try that. Depends, of course, on the source you choose. And resonance. And you can bring in noise into this as well. And you've got access to these parameters here as well, but there are direct knobs for envelopes and filter intensity. So you don't need to menu dive for all of these parameters. And let's check out the last page, key tracking slopes, if you're into that. So all that was just one filter. You've got 2 of them, and stereo filtering is totally possible if you set them in parallel. Pan one oscillator hard left, one hard right, send one to one filter and another to the second filter. Then you should now have one filter in one ear, another in the other ear, and I mapped this macro knob to control both. Moving on down the filter chain, we've got an amp. For people seeking the ultimate in authenticity, there are multiple VCA types, which changes the response to envelopes. So you're welcome to explore this if fidelity to a certain synth model interests you. More interesting to me, though, is the drive control. So this is our sound with some resonance and with drive. This isn't the MS-20 filter, by the way. So this is, say, the Moog filter with drive, an SEM filter with drive. I think they did a really nice job here. Okay, moving on to modulation. Like I mentioned, things here are very similar to Modwave and Wavestate. You've got 4 envelopes, besides being ADSR envelopes with sustain that can go into negative territory and everything except the amp envelope, which kind of makes sense. You've also got a delay and hold stage, so that's different compared to Modwave. And you can also explore a few per synth emulation modes. Again, I won't cover these here, but they're here if you want to dive that deep. Since there are so many oscillators and options here, I'm almost tempted to say that 4 envelopes aren't enough, but you can, of course, point these to any parameter you like. You don't have to point them to pitch, filter A and filter B. Like on Modwave and Wavestate, by the way, page 3 of the envelopes gives you a bunch of other ways to trigger envelopes beside just hitting a note, which is pretty amazing. And then moving on to the LFOs, you've got 5 of them, again, pre-routed to certain destinations, but you can map them anywhere else you like, with, as far as I saw, the same shapes as Modwave and Wavestate. And if you don't have enough LFOs, the envelopes can loop, by the way. And then the mod matrix works again the same way. I showed you how to make connections earlier pretty easily by touching a destination and a source. And then the mod matrix has a control option. So say if you want to use the mod wheel to control the mod depth of an LFO, you can do that, which is excellent. And as you can see, there's no shortage of mod sources here. And then I covered mod processors in depth in my Modwave video. These let you process or modify one or more mod sources in one of multiple ways. For example, to smoothen a mod source, to add 2 mod sources, to quantize a mod source, or perform various logic functions based on 2 mod sources. The difference is that where you previously had just 2 of these, now you've got 8 of them. These work on different levels, the mod level, the program level, or the performance level, and they vary based on what you can connect them to. Next up, there are a few features in Multipoly that haven't changed at all from Modwave as far as I can tell. These are the excellent motion sequencer, the arpeggiator, chaos physics, the unison and randomize functions. I covered all of these extensively in my Modwave review, which quite a few people saw. I'm going to assume you did and move on, but if you didn't, I'll link to that video below, and if I missed anything, I'll add it to the description of this video. And then the effects are mostly the same as well, but there are a couple new ones, so let's take a listen to them. So this is our core sound, and there's a new vintage distortion, and it, like the other effects, comes with multiple presets. So that's that, and then there's a new rotary speaker effect. This is the clean audio. And this is the rotary speaker. So that's what's new. I go through quite a few of the other effects in my Modwave video linked below. Okay, let's talk about pros and cons for Multipoly. On the pros side, you can judge for yourself as I play its presets coming right up, but I think it sounds great. And when you combine its 3 oscillator engines with the dual filters, which you can also route in stereo, the multiple filter models, the motion sequencer, the chaos physics, all the modulation options, and then when you think that you get 4 copies of those with 4 layers with their different mod options and motion sequencers. There's so much to explore here. It's very easy to get carried away in sound design journeys and very hard to get bored. All of the above are differentiating features you can't get on other synths except Modwave and Wavestate, and I spoke about the differences between this and those throughout this video. Further, on the pros side, Multipoly comes with multiple interesting presets that I think can keep you busy for a while. Many of these have interesting macro controls. Some of these can get pretty complex. You can learn a lot from these multi-layer patches. Often the mod wheel and the macro knobs are mapped to different interesting parameters. With interesting chaos physics options to explore. And you get not only dozens of these presets, but also the sub-presets, meaning the layers that you can mix and match individually, the motion sequencing presets. So there are plenty of starting points here besides a simple, boring init preset, not to mention the interesting randomization options. Further on the pros, while there is definitely a learning curve here, the fact that it has an editor eases that and helps get a big picture of what's going on in complex multi-layer patches. So those are the pros. On the cons side, on the top of my list is this small screen. With MicroKORG 2, Korg has proven they can put a nice color screen in an affordable package, and while I think the hardware interface is fine for most of the synth's elements, it still would have been better to have these parameters on one page as opposed to 3, and this applies to many of the modules that have more than one page. And of course, the motion sequencer view is a simple symbolic representation of what's going on as opposed to what you get on the editor. Beside that, having 3 octaves is pretty limiting for a polysynth. Even the original monopoly had 44 keys, and there's no aftertouch if that's important to you. In terms of firmware wishlist, there's so much going on here. Asking for more might sound silly, but unlike Modwave, the arpeggiator here is global, meaning 1 for all 4 layers. It would be nice to have it apply to some layers, but not all of them. Another thing you should be aware of, Korg has already released excellent software versions of Modwave, Wavestate, and Op6. As of the making of this video, there's no official word regarding a software multipoly, but if you want to get a taste for the sequencing workflow, the software version of Modwave is an excellent place to start. So to summarize, while multipoly is named after a vintage synth, it gives modern synths a run for their money, especially at its price. If the cons I mentioned above don't bother you and you're looking for a hardware synth that can keep you creating and busy for a while, and I mean that in a good way, I think multipoly is a very enjoyable and flexible synth, and there are modulation options here that you can't get on any other synth except its siblings. With dual filters, 4 oscillators, and 4 layers of that, this can do things many other synths can't. As far as how it sounds, stay tuned for me playing dozens of its presets, and if you'd like ideas for what to do with all these mod sources and destinations, check out my ever-expanding book of electronic music ideas, tips, and tricks, available to the people who support this channel on Patreon. Hit like if this was useful, ring the YouTube bell below if you want to make sure you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching.